Hello, everyone, and welcome to Threads of Fate. I am your host, Kira Ryberg, and we are joined once again by the beautiful, incredible, wonderful, intelligent Chloe Margherita. Welcome back to the
Hello,
show, Chloe.
hello. Thank you. So thrilled to be here and get my weekly glow up from you.
I have to I have to keep it
Mhm.
going now. It's like we're
Yeah,
already at Gemini 2, so like why not go all the way to Pisces 3 with it? Even
right.
if the people are like, we get it, she's incredible. But I just have to
Let them know.
continuously remind them,
Hmm.
right?
I agree.
All right, so today we are diving into the second decan of Gemini. As we've talked about in the past, the decans tell the story of the sign. So if you haven't listened to Gemini 1 yet, go back and listen to that one first because it's going to set the stage for a lot of the conversation that we're going to be having today. But Gemini 2 is one of my personal favorites. I think it's such a fun decan and it's the duality that exists in all of
Oh
Gemini, but
yeah.
particularly in Gemini 2 is so rich to explore. It's one of my favorite ones to talk about in consult. So I'm really excited for this conversation. How do you introduce Gemini 2 when you're talking about it to other
Yeah.
people?
Yeah, well, there's a few ways. As you say, I'm also very into this deck, and because it still right embodies the duality of Gemini, but to me, it's like this is like the fun, dangerous, sexy version of that
Totally.
duality where there's like
Yes.
passion and there's like feeling behind it. Um, and when something I really also emphasize with this, and I emphasize with Gemini in general, is that I don't think we talk about the sacred marriage aspect of Gemini and how it's like these two, right? It's setting up a duality, right? The twins, but they're these two poles that are always entwined with each other.
Mm,
And it's about like, how do you marry these two together while still letting them be separate beings? And so, like, right, the kind of concept of the soulmate, or these two, how we used to have four limbs and two heads, and then we were separated and came back together. Like, that is very much at play with Gemini too. So this is definitely like I feel like there's still an intellectual bent with all of Gemini, but whereas Gemini 1 is much more like hitting the books, this is like, well,
mm.
how do I embody that dynamic like interpersonally?
Totally, interpersonally and also creatively. I feel like there is a huge creative force at play with this decan, as there are in any decan that is kind of co-ruled by Mars and Venus, right? We've talked
Totally.
about this previously, but there is like this kind
Mm-hmm.
of energy with the two of them where you're able to apply the action, the energy, the force, and the determination of Mars with this kind of beautiful, creative, generative quality of Venus. And that usually creates people who are artists in some way, shape, or form. And I feel like this decan is home to a lot of really notable artists. And there are people who usually have a way of conveying their artistry through words, through speech, through, wisdom. You still have that mercurial influence because this is still Mercury's sign, but you're getting a lot more of that Mars Venus, which of course, like also Mars and Venus both occupy their bounds, also occupy this decan as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you really have like kind of either a strong Venusian influence or a strong Martial influence. And there's like 2 degrees, the first 2 degrees, I think, that are Jupiter's bounds. There's, variation here, but you're really getting a lot more of this Mars Venus thing, which I don't feel like we tend to ascribe to Gemini at
No.
all. And this is one of those ones where you start unpacking it and you're like, oh, I see how this is very different from the stereotype that I have of Gemini in my mind, that is probably a
Exactly.
lot more Gemini 1 than it is Gemini 2.
Right. But it's so fascinating now that you mention it, how uniquely aligned the bounds of Gemini are to its decans.
I
Like that feels
know.
very unique.
I
Right.
know.
And
I
really
think about
like,
this all the time.
yeah, it's like I feel like we could spend a whole podcast talking about that. But it's like there is just such a strong like Venus Mars. And as such, right, where you're placed in the decan, right, Venus is gonna be strong in some places and Mars is gonna be extra loud in some places. And
Hmm.
so, right, it's yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start. It's like, right, whereas I feel like the last decan is very much like letting it be too, right? There is like this push and pull with that Venus Mars of like embodying both, knowing that you can be both sides, but also like letting yourself be contradictory without feeling
Totally.
like you're a hypocrite. Like you can wear many different hats, and even if they feel opposed, like it's all you. Like,
Yes.
thinking, right, this is the fixed decan of Gemini. It's about finding that point of stillness amongst change.
Totally. It's the fixed one because we're in the middle of the sign, but it is also the Libra decan as well, which
Yeah.
is where we get Venus's
Mhm.
rulership from, which I think really reflects what you were kind of saying about being able to hold opposing principles, right? In
Mhm.
Libra, what we're doing is constantly saying, like, this is what I think. What do you think? Okay, this is for me, but what about you? Right? There is this ability to kind of constantly check in a relational context of what is the other side of this? What is the other point of view here? And I think Gemini too can certainly play a little bit of the devil's advocate in that way because you have such a strong mercurial influence here too. That's a little bit like,
Oh yeah.
well, But there is that Libran quality. And one of the things that I love about the fact that there is that bound decan overlap that we were talking about too is that Venus, for example, pretty strong in this middle part of Gemini in a way
Right,
that
which you not
right,
expect.
exactly. You don't expect that at all. And similarly for Mars, right? And it's like, I think, Kopic has this thing where he says that if a planet is in its own bound in Decan, then it becomes quote unquote enthroned, right? I have not been able to find a source on what this, like where this comes from. And I have
She's
looked.
tried.
I've gone straight to not straight to the source, but I even asked Chris Brennan. I was like, where does this come from? He's like, I don't know. So I've tried to find it, but me and Chloe and some of our friends, like we did some research on this. Like, okay, then does it play out in practice if we can't find it in the text? And it absolutely does. Like when a planet is in its own bound and face, it really does start to get like extremely powerful because it is it's like you think about it, right? The planet is living a story that is of their nature, right? So they're very comfortable. It's like they wrote the book and they have their own tools to navigate that storyline with. So even if they are dependent on
Ooh,
another planet for resources and comfort, it's like, of course, they're going to do really well there. And we get
right.
that with both Venus and Mars here, which I think is just a fun thing to think about because it really gives you insight into, you might have Venus in Gemini too, right? And be like, oh, my Venus is
Hmm.
so weak. And it's like, actually, your Venus is really strong and really capable. And when we kind of deny that, I think we take something away from the multifacetedness of these planets and their various expressions, right? And this one's
Yeah.
going to express more mercurially, but it doesn't mean that we're not getting that Venus Mars.
Right. Yeah. As you're speaking, it's like I'm almost imagining like Venus like has like a summer home or like a room to rent in this like part of Gemini where it's like, it's a little foreign, but it's like she has this like specific room set up with all of her nice things. So she can at
Hmm.
least like be an artist and serve and like use Mercury's tools. So like there is a nice sympathy with Venus and Mercury. And I was looking at
Totally.
right, I did this like styling with the stars, like
Yes.
astrofashion thing where I specifically looked at like the Venus decans and like how they manifested. And there's so many style icons like with their Venus here, like Megan Fox, Frida Kahlo, Courtney Love, Jackie O, Cher, Heidi Klum,
Yeah.
like Naomi Campbell, like there, and it's hard to kind of put any of them like in a
In a
box
box.
like with their look, but like there's that thing of like they stand out, like they have something that is very signature to them and I think speaks to who they are, but also like plays with it in a lot of interesting ways.
Yeah, and I think that there's like kind of, Mars brings this ability to take risks with
Mm-hmm.
either the aesthetic or the creation or whatever it is that Venus is trying to do here. And then Mercury adds a little bit of that lightheartedness, a little bit of that playfulness. And it's like, why wouldn't I wear this on the red carpet? Or why wouldn't I try this, right? Or why wouldn't I do something that's a little bit more bold or audacious, but still in the
Exactly.
name of beauty or relationality or something of that nature? And it's a fun combo. It's one of the reasons I love this Decan so much is because it manifests in so many different ways. And
Yeah.
it's also just endlessly fascinating because it holds so many contradictions within it. Right. And I think that is something that I love in life. I love when someone it can be more than one thing, right? And I think this is the both and Decan. It's like I'm going to be this and I'm going to be that. I think is what Austin Coppock says a lot of times, like the this that thing, right? But it's like I'm going to be both that and this, and that kind of nature comes through in ways that are seemingly appository, right? If you listen to the very first like Decan's intro episode we did, we were talking about Kurt Cobain's chart, and he has his MC here, right? And he was just a mess of contradictions. And he even has a quote where he talks about the fact that he wants his lyrics to be a contradiction and he
Oh
wants
yeah.
you to kind of misunderstand him and he wants to be joking one minute and political the next. And I really love that. And maybe it's because I have my lot of fortune here. So like I am very of this Decan as well. But I love when people are like, you're not going to put me in a box. And I think Gemini too constantly is pushing the boundaries and really testing how far can I take this expression of self in a way that is not going to be confined to one way of being.
Yeah, right. And I think, right, that can, in that very Mars Mercury way, like it can cause controversy, or, you can have people having opinions, right? Because,
Hmm.
Kurt Cobain's wife, Courtney Love, right, has her Mars here, as you put in the doc. And, I think you see that so strongly in just everything she does. She's like, I want to be like the prom queen and the football player. Like, I want to be like the badass rock star. And I also want to be married to him. And people hated it. They hated it. They hated her, right? Everything that was wrong with him was, placed onto her,
Hmm.
and like had to basically like be like they weren't allowed to be like both. And it's kind of like he was like, especially after he died, right? Like this sainted, like male, pure he rock star, and she was like the evil harpy who like
Yeah.
basically, the way they told it, like he has no agency, and she basically forced him.
Yeah.
And it's
Which
like I don't know about
be so
that.
for real. Like he was
Literally,
obsessed with
literally.
her, and we
Right.
talk about them a lot in different examples when we can because we both love kind of
Love.
the Courtney Kurt
Especially when I
dynamic.
first, yes, got into the Decans. Like I was also in a very big Kurt Cobain phase. So like I
Yeah.
know so much of their charts through the Decans.
Yeah, me too, me too. And I think, you see this with Kurt too, even just in the ways that he presents on stage, right? Like it's his midheaven in this Decan. And Austin Coppock calls this the hermaphrodite, right? And I think that there is something very queer, right? Very gender bending that comes through in this space. And you can almost see that just through Kurt's being like, I'm going to wear a dress on stage in a time where that was not necessarily, looked upon with kindness
Especially,
and
yeah.
still isn't, you know what I mean? Like we can just see like the vitriol that trans people receive in the media day after day after day for just being themselves. And
Yeah.
it's like we can kind of see that dynamic show up here where you are going to have some martial controversy that comes from that. And still, I think it gives you the audacity to do it anyway. To be
Right.
like, I don't care if you think that it's weird that I'm wearing a dress on stage. It's what's comfortable, and I'm going to
Right.
do that.
Yeah. He kind of invited it because I think a big thing he prickled with is like he very much wanted to be famous and successful from his music, but he didn't want, the kind of like, superficial jocks in his mind to be his fans. And
Totally.
in one of his, album notes, he's like, if you're racist, sexist, homophobic, like stop listening to my music. And so I think he kind of wanted to ruffle feathers.
Yeah.
And I think he also, like, for the time, like he was, relatively progressive. Like one of my favorite lyrics of him is never met a wise man. Like, if so, it's a woman. Like, hearing that as a kid, I was like, a man is saying that, especially when it's like, we're taught like as, as women, like we're supposed to relate to everyone, but men can't
Mm.
ever relate to women. So to see like a man like say that women are in some ways better, like even cheekily was like, okay, like that it felt very striking to me.
Yeah, totally. And it's like embracing the fact that both men and women and people who identify outside of that binary are valid and have something to
Right.
offer and something to create and bring into the world. And I think that we see that through, Kurt Cobain, we see that through Courtney Love, but there's also all these other ways that it can express, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to get the heat of that.
Yeah.
And I think of this a lot with the deity who's associated with this
Mm-hmm.
Decan, who is I'm gonna butcher it again. I'm gonna try to
Wouldn't be
say it
doing
like
any better.
I would say like Cybele, but I think when I said it to my mentee who's Greek, she was like Cybele, and I was like, oh, that sounds gorgeous. That's probably how
Yeah.
you think that's yeah that one. And she is kind of this mother, again, like a very maternal
Love her.
deity, which is very similar to what we see in Gemini 1, but she's also depicted as a foreigner all of the time, wherever she goes, right? So she's this foreigner deity. And I think about how when you are willing to push the binary, when you are willing to push those boundaries and ideas and expectations that other people have of you and what they want you to conform to, you're immediately placing yourself on the outside. And
Right.
that is
And
like,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Right. And no, it's true. And I think I mean, I really connect her to a fixed star that also Kurt has conjoined, who's ascendant, called Denebola, which is this
Mm,
lion tail star that's very much about like finding power on the margins. And I think that's like a thing to consider if you have placements here, is like, how do you find that power not being in the center, right? But like being able to go like both and places. And there is very much a gender bending thing with her too, because she was a hermaphrodite. You know, she was
Yeah.
born with both set of genitalia, and then right, they didn't, you know, people were threatened by that, so they cut off her phallus, and from the phallus grew Attis, who was, you know, her eternal lover. And you know, she also had the Gale, her priestesses were, you know, kind of what, you know, you could see of like, you know, what we would call like trans feminine individuals. And so there's something here too about like being able to embody the liminal. Like there is something spiritual about that, right? You're kind of getting to like deeper truths, because I mean, I'm of the mind that like, you know, regardless of gender identity, like we would all benefit from seeing us as containing both masculine and feminine. Right. But
100%.
when we live in a world that says like, you know, this is what girls do and this is what boys do and F everyone else, it's like, I don't think anyone
Benefits from that.
benefits, right? Because it's like, you know, maybe dudes should, you know, would be a little easier to deal with if they were allowed to wear dresses when they were kids, right? Or they didn't always
Totally.
have to be this like aggressive stoic figure. And I think that's part of why like we like that, you know, I think that's why Kurt was such a like big figure for so many people at the time, is because he was really feminine. But then we don't like it when women are too manly. So I think Courtly got like the negative side. Of course, her malefic out of sect is there too. So it's going to be difficult to be both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too about how, you know, like Cybele, like she was suggested that she was a mediator between the boundaries of the known and the unknown and the civilized and the
Yeah,
wild, right? And
exactly.
it's like the living and the dead. And there's all of these ways that she occupies that liminal space, like you're talking about. And when we embrace the liminal, I think that there's so much juice there. There's so much, you know, that we can kind of pull from that space when we aren't fixating on an idea of what it should look like, right? But
Exactly.
finding yourself on the margins, I think, is a big part of this experience. And like for me, you know, like I have my lot of fortune here. And that just refers more to kind of one, just like what you're doing. Like in a lot of ways, it has a lot to do with your profession, right? And like what I do professionally inherently puts me on like the fringes of society, right? Like I don't walk into a
Or
room with like, you know, my husband's family or whoever and be like, I am an astrologer, right? Like it's always like the kind of thing where I'm like, I'm a consultant. And then only when people kind of like pick and pry, like then I'll tell them, right? Because I know that it's going to have this love hate reaction to it. And I
totally.
think that love hate reaction is also very Mars Venus, which is of the nature of this fate,
Yes.
you
Yes.
know?
Well, right. Well, it makes me think. Well, first makes me think of the phrase, or just like haters make me famous, or I love haters, or like I'm very much of the mind of like, right, if you hate something, right, that also means you can love it, and vice versa, right? If
Totally.
you can feel one, you can feel the other. It's really indifference that is like the opposite of that. But I think that's the kind of the price of that very smoldering, passionate magnetism that this Decan can create, is like people are going to be drawn to you, and they might not always be drawn to you for the same reasons, or they might flip.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And if you have placements here too, like you might flip flop back and forth too between like, oh, I love this thing, oh, I hate this thing, or I love this thing, I hate this thing. And you
Right.
can embody both. You can be a lover and a hater, you know, and I think that is at the heart of this deck.
Right.
And I know it's at the heart
Exactly.
of your personal philosophy in life.
Right. Of course.
Chloe is constantly championing the idea that she is a hater in the name of love, which I, as someone with a lot of fortune here, really appreciate. You know, like you have
Right.
given me the freedom
Oh my God. Thank
to be a
you.
hater as much as I'm a lover. And I
Well,
think that is part of this.
right. And I guess like that's so I'm just thinking of like, right, I have my sun in Mars and like the opposite Decan in Sagittarius
Hmm.
too. And so for me, of course, I'm like, oh, they're the same thing. Right. But right in Gemini too, it's like, no, they're actually different, but they are related to each other. Whereas I
And I
think with
can be both.
Sagittarius, right, right. And with Sagittarius, it's much more like, okay, well, it all has to be consistent. And Gemini is like,
Hmm.
relax. No, it doesn't.
Yes, we can be two things at once. And
Exactly.
it's something that I see show up here a lot is that kind of, you know, like you have, you know, for example, like the ruler of your 10th house here, it's almost always people who have two different careers, right?
Totally.
There's kind of this, like we were talking about the story of the twins in the first episode of Gemini 1, right? Where it's like that first decan is the division of one into two. And here is where we find two really hold kind of steadfastly, right? There are multiple things. The
Yes.
twins now exist as separate from each other, but also conjoined in ways, right? And of one another, but they represent the polarity, right? The two different experiences. And so they tend to feel antithetical to one another, like
Right.
whatever, however this manifests, right? Like if you have your ascendant here, you might feel like you lead two different lives in some way, shape, or form, right? And there's kind of that quality there too of, yeah, being able to hold space for multiple forms of self-expression if it's your ascendant, or multiple career paths if it's your your MC or what have you. But it almost also shows up where in Gemini one, it's many, many, many things. Like it's like the
Yes.
division 1 into 2, but like and then, right? Like the constant division into the many, versus here it really is two. It's
Yeah.
not 15, it's two.
Totally. Right. And they're in this kind of like in this way, it's like, right, they're always there's this division of they're always kind of in a conversation, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like one feels like it's opposed, but it's kind of just like you're set, sorting, right, the two sides of you into like their specific boxes in a way. Like I see Dolly Parton has her at midheaven here. And I would say her two things is, on the one hand, right, she's a very successful country singer and she's known, right, for, her very like made up, Venusian
Provocative.
appearance.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. And on the other hand, she's an extremely like prolific philanthropist. Right. And
Yes.
that, and in some ways, she says like that is her true legacy, particularly in that very Gemini way, like childhood literacy. And she's
Mhm.
donated like, countless books and has really just, revitalized like her whole county by building like Dollywood and the Dollywood Foundation. So like those two things of like extreme like self-centeredness, right, in a
Yeah.
way of like this is who I am, but extreme like bringing that back to the people.
Yeah, it's like we don't think that Dolly Parton, especially in her early, the early stages of her career when she was more of a sex symbol, right? And also was doing country music in a very different, provocative way, right?
Yeah.
We don't tend to think of that person as being the philanthropist, and yet she
Yeah.
is here to push that boundary to show us actually I can be both, and you don't think I can, then watch me. And I
Yeah.
think that kind of watch me do it then is very martial in general, but here it
I'll prove it.
expresses
Yeah.
through, yeah, it's like I'll prove it then. Here it expresses through sometimes like the artistry, sometimes through the relationships of the individual, because there is that Venusian influence, or just through the aesthetic, through the appearance.
Mm-hmm.
So there's kind of
Mm-hmm.
this call back to these Venusian principles of like you apply the audacity, the brazenness of Mars to those things, and you get these really interesting results.
Right. And she was also like, extremely talented songwriter, like mythically
Yeah.
wrote Jolene and I Will Always Love You on the same recording session. Right. So it's like she has the image, but she also has like the extreme, right, very mercurial writer talent to express that. It's just, she's great.
Yeah, she is great. And, it is people who you like good writers, right, tend to come out of this decan because it is Mercury's sign. And
Yeah.
now we're applying that creative impulse to the mercurial pursuit, right? So we often get songwriters, I think, show up here a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Songwriters and
Mm-hmm.
singers, people who are using their voices, but like Bob Dylan has his Venus here. Paul McCartney has his Mercury here in the 10th house, right? There is this kind of, and then we talked about Kurt Cobain, we talked about Courtney Love, right?
Yeah.
Also, both very prolific songwriters. And there is that kind of ability to tap into that deep mercurial desire to share and spread a story, right?
Yeah.
But doing that through this artistic kind of lens, and then, having that martial component of like touring, for example, or going out and performing the thing of really putting your whole ass in it. You know what I mean? Is kind
Proving
of the Mars
yourself.
side, proving yourself. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. I definitely want you to read the Agrippa quote here, but my favorite Gemini 2-1 is like this like irascible soldier covered in armor, but he's like chilling in a garden and like making jokes and like being like and holding a flower. Like there's something, yeah, there is something about like putting it out into the public. It's about how you're seen and how you see yourself. Like it's not just, oh, I'm too inside. It's like, right, that martial bravery to like offer up your duality and, whether any criticism, that'll probably be like, oh, you're not consistent. Right. And then, okay, now what? Like I'm doing something
Yeah.
else here.
Yeah. And it's like consistency isn't morally superior,
No, no,
you
it's
know?
like, the self is empty. Let's start there. And I think, yeah, especially I think if you have like your sun or your ascendant here, there just has to be an understanding that like, yeah, yourself is going to be much more malleable and much less about one specific thing. And I think that allows you to be flexible. I think
Totally.
especially thinking about like none of these planets are necessarily like very moral or concerned with what's right. And I
Hmm.
think there's like, what is it, Rumi? Like beyond the space of like good and bad, like that's where you'll find me. Like there was a gun shop in like rural Oregon that had that like on the side of their building.
My God.
So it's like, yeah, it's like you don't be afraid to be a little bit of a baddie, is I guess what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say. Like, I really feel that with the flower essence I made for this is black lace elder, which is elder is this like beautiful ancient tree, and it usually has these white flowers. But this is like literally such a goth plant. Like it's like black purpley leaves and like pink tinged flowers. And I actually made this essence at a wedding.
Oh my
But
God.
it
I
just
love
feels
that.
like right, it was so gorgeous, and it was a wedding of like these two like so like very opposing people. Like my friend is like Virgo, very like straight laced, get shit done, very like quiet, and then like her husband is like a Sag rising, like Jupiter in the first, just like metal worker. Like he comes home and is like no matter how much he washes his hands, it's like they're always covered in like metal pieces or like metal residue. But like there's a sense here of like whenever I work with this Decan, like it feels very, or not this Decan, this essence, like it's very amorous, but like
Mm.
it's like kind of like the scene that I came up for it is like you take it if you want to feel like you're like riding a motorcycle to a biker bar where everyone knows your name. Like it's super like
Totally.
I'm gonna be kind of like controversial or maybe like a little pokey, and like whoever is drawn to me is right for me. Like don't be afraid
Yeah.
to like alienate people because like you're gonna do it anyway.
Yeah, right. And that's like Cybele once again, right? It's like the foreigner quality, right? Where you're going to be on the outside to some, but you're going to be on the inside with others. And I think there is that provocative quality, but there's also a sexy quality to this Decan
Yeah.
as well, where it's like you can embody both of that, maybe more like the intellectual side that Mercury brings with this being his sign, but also the Venus Mars of it all of like, no, you can charm and schmooze and attract. And there's a magnetism here that people are drawn to, right? We see it
Yeah.
with Dolly Parton, we see it with Courtney Love, where it's like you love to hate her. And I think that's such a Venus Mars thing. We talked about it with Aries 3, right? Like hate watching, right, is
Yeah.
very like Mars Venus. And I think we kind of
Totally.
see an element of that show up in this Decan as well, right? Like Marilyn Monroe had her son here in the 11th house of audiences and groups of people. And it's like she is this sex symbol, but she's also like woefully misunderstood, and I think we see that come through as well with like the tarot card that's associated with this Decan is the Nine of Swords. And again, not usually, it's so funny because in all of Gemini, right, you have the 8, 9, and 10 of Swords. And anyone who's familiar with tarot usually doesn't like to draw those cards.
No,
Like they don't
no,
feel like Gemini on the surface. And then when you peel back the layers, it starts making a lot more sense of like why that's the case. I'm trying so hard to
totally.
find the
Yeah,
Nine
do
of
the
Swords
thing.
imagery.
But I feel like right of those three, I think the nine, like that's the one that I would be like most like ugh, of those three, because eight is like, okay, I get it, slow down. 10 is like,
Hmm.
okay, I'm making it into a bigger deal. But this is like you're like just the way the swords are sort of locked together, like floating in this like nightmarish like
Yeah.
void. And this person's head is in their hand. It's like, are they crying or are they just waking up from a nightmare and they're relieved? Like there's you don't get a ton of like information. It just feels like, okay, something's here is happening and it's not good.
Yeah, yeah. And if for those who aren't watching the video version, it's a picture of a figure who has 9 swords above their head. They're kind of sitting up in bed with their head in their hands, like Chloe said, and you can't see their facial expression. So we just don't know
Yeah,
how the person's feeling. I tend to think of this card as like the anxiety card. Like I'm really in
totally.
my head about this. I'm really stressed out about this. It's waking me up in the middle of the night, but it's also usually not that serious.
Yeah.
It's like where are we giving our power away to the fear of what could be rather than what is? And I think that is kind of that martial component is like there is going to be an element of this Decan that asks you to have courage, that asks you to have bravery, to ask you to face something that maybe is uncomfortable or pokey. And Venus is here to be like, and it's actually going to be okay though. Like you'll act,
Yeah.
it's like generative conflict, for example, which is something that we were
Right.
just talking
Literally.
about. And it's like that ability to kind of bring together the best of Venus and Mars is like if you're not willing to fight with someone, then you're not really willing to be in relationship with them either.
Right. Right. Or I think part of it is like, right, if you're going to be in relationship with anyone, long enough, like you're going to get both the Venus and the Mars. Like there's going
Yes.
to be times of harmony and there's going to be times of conflict. And so like in this mercurial sign, it's about like, right, knowing that both are included and being able to shift, but not getting stuck there. And I think that's what you really see with the Nine of Swords, kind of like the Eight of Swords. It's like, this is like the worst case scenario of working with this
Mhm.
decan, which is like, maybe you're struggling with the duality or being like,
Yeah.
oh, this thing that was once this, or I was once this and now I'm that. And, having, friction or wishing that it were something else than what it was. And so I think that's where you can get stuck there, right? Because there is a
Yeah.
fixity to this, but, the mercurial aspect still requires a fluidity, which I think can probably take some time to master.
Totally. And I think of this too as being like, once again, coming back to this idea of being both and, right? It's like you can
Mm-hmm.
be serious and you can be playful, and you can be both sides of that spectrum. You
Yeah.
can be scared and you can be really invested. You can want to fight someone and want to fuck them. Like, you get both sides. And that is like the Mars Venus of it all. It's two sides of the same coin, which brings us back to the fact that this is the Libra decan as well, right? Where it's like you can hold these opposing principles and still that doesn't change the earnestness or the genuine quality of whatever is at play, right? It's like, no, you can just actually occupy both. And on that note of like the kind of playfulness is it and the pain, it does bring me
Mm-hmm.
back to the Agrippa quote, which I think is
Please.
so good, is a man in whose hand is a pipe and another being bowed down digging the earth, and they signify infamous and dishonest agility, as that of jesters and jugglers. It also signifies labors and painful searchings.
That's what I think of when I see jugglers. You dishonest, agile so and so's.
I just love that it's like you're a clown and also you're like in pain. You know what I mean? It's like you
Which is true of a lot of comedians. I
no,
think
so true.
you really have to be in touch with that pain.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, and you can be both, right? It's like you can occupy this space of playfulness and lightheartedness, and also you're going
Mm-hmm.
to occupy this space of seriousness and the pain that comes from knowing two ends of anything, right? It's like
Yeah.
by allowing both sides to be present, you also allow for a more full expression of something, right?
Wait, what are the two sides you're referring to?
Anything in this second. Two sides of anything.
Anything.
The two sides of
Yeah,
selfhood, like the I was really thinking like the pain and the playfulness that we were talking about with the Agrippa
totally.
quote.
Right.
But that could manifest in, again, why try to fit this decade in a box?
No,
It can apply to
completely.
anything.
Right. Because I mean, what I was thinking of, I love that you put Bell Hooks here, who has her
Yeah.
ascendant here. And
Hmm.
I feel like, I mean, I also know that she has a ton in Libra, but I think
She
her
does.
most famous book, All About Love, I think expresses this decan so well. Where, I mean,
Totally.
the main thesis is like love is not a feeling, it's not a state of mind, it's an action. And so, speaking specifically to people who, right, have people in their lives who ostensibly love them, but don't show up for them or like actually abuse them. And that action part feels very martial, and then of course writing about it, I mean, it's a kind of revolutionary idea because I mean
Hmm.
everywhere we see it's like we see love as a form of maybe coercion, or it's like, oh, you're a part of this family system, we say that we love you, so you have to follow along. But here she's saying no, like you get to choose, right, based on like are their actions actually embodying this feeling, or is it just this
Yeah.
abstract thing that they can cling to, right? I really felt this watching Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, which we both obsessed with, and like seeing like these loser men being like, but I love you, and it's like, yeah, and then but you're cheating on her and you're like whining and you're not doing anything, so I'm sorry, your words actually don't mean anything to me, can you please
Yes.
leave?
Yeah. And it's like Mars wants you to back up the words that Mercury's bringing with
Exactly.
action. It's like if you love someone, then show up for them. Don't abuse them. You know what I mean? And yeah, Chloe and I are both really into the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives right now, which maybe
Mm-hmm.
won't, when this episode goes out, it will probably be way, not in the current discourse, but there is also like the duality of that show is so funny, right? It's like
Oh
the
yeah.
sanctity of Mormonism and, like these people, like they won't drink and they have all these like very
Mm-hmm.
rigid rules that they have to follow. And then also on the other hand of it, they are so unhinged. They are
Yeah.
doing things that most people would not do. They live for the drama, right? And they're kind of engaging in Mormonism in a way that even the church has a big problem with, right? It's like
Yeah.
this controversial
Yeah.
representation of this idea of what this religion stands for, right? And so
Right.
it's like they are, but their whole thing is like, but we can be both and. Like I can be Mormon and I can be a little slutty. I can,
Exactly.
get
Right.
married and get divorced, and that's okay too. And trying to kind of change the rigidity that that religion holds. And it's, yeah, that's actually so funny. I wonder, like, the birth chart of the show.
God, I know.
You
Look
know
it
what I
up.
mean? I'm like, I wonder if they have.
Yeah, but it seems and it feels like a good lesson to take forward with Gemini 2 placements is, I mean, you see these people, they're always figuring out how can they bend the rules without actually breaking them. I mean, the fact that like Salt Lake
Oh
City
my
is
God.
inundated with soda shops because
Wait,
they
you're
can't
gonna,
have coffee.
no, you're gonna die. I looked up the release date,
Oh
September
my
6th,
God.
2024, and
Yeah.
Jupiter is in Gemini too,
Of course
when
it
the first
is.
season came
Of
out. So like,
course it is.
of course, like we do, and it's
Religion.
In the Mars bound, right? So
Right.
like the controversy, the
Mm-hmm.
audacity,
Mm-hmm.
the discourse of it all.
Right. It's like they're constantly like going up to the line and like being like, oh, well, we're swinging, but it's soft swinging, so it's okay. Or like, we can't do, weed or alcohol, but we can do ketamine trials. Or like, we can't have coffee in the morning, but we can have like giant Dr. Peppers with coconut cream and, vanilla syrup in it
Yeah,
because
that
I
was
guess
killing
they didn't
me.
have
The way,
soda in John Smith's time.
like when they were like, yeah, like I can't drink, but I can do ketamine. I was like, well, that's an interesting take,
Very that's Mercury working. That is not Jupiter. You know what I mean?
that's Jupiter in detriment, is what that is.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like, right. And like, but at the same time, like it's so compelling. It's like, I really want to
It
go
is.
to like one of these soda shops and have like a dirty Dr. Pepper or whatever. It sounds like really fun. And like I
It's
think it's
so
because of that
funny.
tension of like it'd be one thing if just like a random group of girls went to a Chippendale show, but if like Mormon women who have specific underwear and like controlling husbands go, like that is television.
Yes, that is prime time reality TV, baby.
Exactly. And even just the duality of like, this is an extremely patriarchal religion where it's like everything comes back to being married, right? And
100%.
and bringing it
Having
back to the
children.
husband, right?
Hmm.
Right. But at the same time, in that very Venus Mercury way, like it is also encouraged for like Mormon women to become lifestyle influencers to then bring people into the church or make it seem compelling. So
Hmm.
through doing that, right, they became like the primary breadwinners of their families. And one of
Yes.
them mentions like, I make more in a brand deal than like my husband makes in a year. So now he's the homemaker. But like not all the men are okay with that,
Right. Yeah.
But like the facts are facts. Like these women make a ton of money just like coming
Hmm.
together and like dancing basically.
And they love the drama too. And I think that,
Yeah,
like this Decan, a little bit, like there's a little bit of that quality. And I think we see that with
definitely.
Courtney Love, for example, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there is kind of like she does love that drama that she brings to things. And, I think that there is that quality of willing to be controversial is also like the willingness to be dramatic or to be perceived as dramatic. And, there's that. I'm thinking about just the nature of gossip in general
Mm-hmm.
as well, right? And how we kind of demonize like gossip as like a woman's thing, right? But it's how women share stories
Right.
historically through time, right? Is like, or how they give warnings, like the martial component of things,
I
how they
100%
relate to
believe
one
that.
another. And yet then like when men are coming together to talk shit, it's just, and it doesn't even have to be talking shit, but then like that's fine. They're just like shooting the shit. But when women do it, like, oh, it's gossip and
Evil.
it's demonized and they're evil. And
Exactly.
there's like this whole component to like that Venus Mars thing expressing in a Mercury lens, where in the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, like so much of what is at the heart of that show is them all being in drama because they're all gossiping about one another all of the time.
Right.
And also it's how they're all getting their bag. They're all agreed to it.
Literally.
They know what
Yeah.
they signed up for it,
Yeah.
right? So it's also like it can be both and, it can maybe
Right.
be vindictive
Exactly.
at times, and also at other times it can be something that is actually constructive in the sense
I
of
agree.
developing relationships, right?
I
It's
agree.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
bonding.
And to go back to the etymology of gossip. It literally means
Love.
like a god sib, like a god sibling, like
Oh my
someone
God.
who is like, right, part of your, right, spiritual cohort in some way. So it's like there's a sense here of like, right, maybe the walls are down and you're really connecting in this heart to heart way. And I think it, right, you said like the intention is really important, but there's like you're sharing intimate things or you're sharing your
Mhm.
story with someone in a way that can help you feel seen or that can create real change. Like I have had multiple instances of gossip allowing like people, specifically women, to be like, oh, is that guy also like crossed the line with you? Right. Or like
Exactly.
how else, that's how this information, this whispered network can start against maybe people in power or who are entrenched in a community of like, okay, like I can't maybe talk about this with everyone, but like, can I tell you I had this weird thing? Oh, I also had this. Oh, I
Yeah.
also had this. And then that's how you start to realize, oh, it's not just me. Like there's something here that it's worth, right, breaking through in that martial way or like upsetting the social order.
Yeah. It's making me think about those Facebook groups that exist that women are a part of that is like, is
Post your
anyone
man.
else seeing it? Yeah, seeing this man, right? And they'll like post your man and see if like he's cheating on you kind of thing. And it's like, and a lot of women find out that their man is cheating on them through these things. And it's like, in some ways, like if you weren't willing to kind of seek the information to relate to other women in a way that some people might deem gossip, then you might be kind of subjecting yourself to greater pain down the line as well. Right. And so we come back to this Venus Mars thing where it's like it is inherently relational and it might not come across in the most savory way, especially because Mercury does not care about that.
Yeah.
Right. Like Mercury doesn't care if you're
No,
gossiping. Mercury encourages gossip,
anything. Yeah.
And so it's like this whole other component of it, right? And I think that when you get Venus and Mars, you do get those both sides of it, where it's like maybe in some contexts it is really malicious and it's hatred and it's not helpful in any way, shape, or form. And then on the other side of it, it can also be something that brings people together, that helps
Oh yeah.
people uncover deep truths, that, brings us deeper into relationship. And so once again, it's like it can be both
Oh
and I think
totally.
with so many things, it's just allowing for the full expression, like we keep saying, is the best case. And I think in Gemini, we see an ability to do that in a way that gets lost in other parts of the zodiac. And I think that's why also Geminis get the reputation of being gossips, right?
Right.
But it's like at the end of the day, it's not always inherently bad. And it's not
And you're
always
just,
inherently
yeah.
good either.
Right. Right. It's just information, right? That's the,
Hmm.
something I feel like my therapist says whenever it's like someone treats me a certain way. It's like that's information, right? And it's making me
See.
think too of like, right, dangerous information or like when knowledge becomes taboo, I feel like is a thing you can
Mhm.
see here. So like I mean, one of the images I got when I was doing Gnosis with this Decan was like having to literally like crawl through like these like thorny roots and like
Mhm.
getting scratched up. But it's like as soon as I emerge, like the scratches heal. But it's like I have to go through the difficult thing of, the pain first. And I think knowledge can be, I mean, it's, or the truth can set you free, but not before it's done with you. I mean, I think, right, the fact that Freud has his moon here, I mean,
Totally.
right? It's like, quibble with him all you want, but it's the core theory of just like, hey, you have these like repressed desires that like, maybe, it's not a good idea to, kill your dad and marry your mom. But like
Yeah.
by acknowledging like these weird, like essentially amoral, unconscious desires, like that is how we heal ourselves from them, as we first have to remember them to forget them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's kind of a willingness to go there in Gemini too, to be
Yeah.
taboo, to explore the taboos. I think we see that with Freud a lot,
Yeah.
right? And it's just like, you know what? I can go there and I can still be an intellectual, right? Like I can do the taboo thing and I can still be smart because
You
it's
can be
based on my
smart and
research and exactly. I
that's what I
always
think.
always say that to clients with this deck and I'm like, it's like it's this person who wants to be a bimbo and an intellectual.
Mhm.
And as someone with a lot of fortune here, yes,
That
me.
is your
Like,
fate.
and Chloe and I talk about this a lot, how, you say like the word bimbo and people think you're immediately like attacking yourself. I'm like, no, no, no,
Yeah.
no. Like, I don't see that as a bad thing at all. It's like I am a bimbo about some things. I'm not the math person and I'm never going to be the math person. And if you want me to be the astrologer who's going to explain like all of those intricacies and stuff, like I'm not the one, and that's so fine because I know what I'm
Right.
good at and I'm good at other things. And I think there's something about Gemini, but also this Decan in particular, that's like I can be a bimbo and an intellectual. And instead of getting caught up in all of the ways that you are not only seen as the intellectual, but you can also hold both identities,
Yeah.
it does set you free, right? It's like then I can just be free to be what I'm really good at instead of trying to fit into the mold of the idea of what I should be.
Right. And I think, when I was younger, that's something that I really struggled with, especially as a woman.
Mhm.
It kind of felt like there was, especially like, thinking of like Pink's song Stupid Girls. It's like you're either smart or you're into your looks and you're dumb. And
Yep.
that's bad. But also like that was also like what was popular at the time. So it just felt like I had to choose.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that's often put on women is like women who are, beautiful, are seen as like that's all they can be and just, thus they're bimbos, right? I mean,
Yep.
Megan Fox being, a good example, having her Venus here. And so, yeah, I think I'd like to think that things are changing and, yeah, I don't see like my interest in beauty or like clothes or like how I look as, a something that contradicts. I think it makes me more well-rounded, if anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Of like, I
Yeah.
can be a partier, but I can also be really wise.
Totally. It makes me think of Mindy Kaling, who has her
Mhm.
ascendant and Venus in this decan, right? And like she often plays kind of like the bimbo, right? Like the kind of like, oh, like not so smart person, or especially in like The Office where she
Oh,
plays
totally.
Kelly, or even in, her show, The Mindy Project, right? Where she plays like she's a doctor and also she's the doctor that wears pink and is a lot less, academically minded
Hmm.
and kind of serious, right? And at the end of the day, it's like she plays these characters that are a representation of herself because she is the one writing them. And a lot of people forget that she is an incredibly talented writer. She's won awards for her writing. And so much of what she's doing is like this behind the scenes work that is very intellectual, but also it is to create art, right? In a way that it also puts a little bit of heat on her and like some
Oh, totally.
controversy at times too. And she gets a lot of flack for that. But at the end of it, because she's not usually lauded as, as her male, maybe like co-writers tend to
Exactly.
be.
Exactly.
But yeah, there is that ability to be both. And I think to challenge the notion that you can't be, which is like something that I see come through so strongly in the character that she plays in the Mindy Project, right? Where it's like, I'm a doctor and also I like pink and I'm kind of
And
silly and
rom-coms. Yeah.
flirty and yeah, like this kind of energy, right? Where it's like there is an ability to be both. And the more that we limit people into only one form of expression, like the more that we are dulling their complexity. And I think that's a
Yeah.
shame. And I think that's what I love about this decan is like the inherent complexity that exists in the contradiction of this space.
Yeah. And I think there is this, yeah, allowing things to be complicated or not being okay if something doesn't look like something conventional or how we're taught it's
Hmm.
supposed to look like. Because you also really see this with her weird relationship with BJ Novak, where it's like, right? It's
Tea.
like, right? I mean, even in the show, like their will they, won't they was like a huge
Hmm.
part of it. And, their stories, they dated for a little bit and, now they're just really close friends, but he's like, always hanging out with her and her kids to the point where people are like, is he the dad? We don't
Hmm.
know, right? Because they're not saying yes or no. Or I think they officially say no, but it's like, regardless, like he's acting like a dad, like they are close in that way. And
Yeah.
but he's also like the type of guy where I don't think he's ever going to want to be fully like, this is where I am with you completely. And just recently, he's been having dating rumors with like another, person. So it's like, yeah, maybe from the outside it looks a little crazy, but from the inside it's like, I don't know, as long as the kids are okay,
Who
it seems
cares?
to be working for them. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like there's a willingness to do things in a different way, to not subscribe to the notion or the norms, right? And to
Exactly.
challenge those. And I think that that's one of the exciting parts of this Decan is like it is people who challenge that. And I always admire people who are willing to have that audacity to do that, right? Because that's how we progress, I think,
Right.
is the people that are brave enough to be like, actually, no, I'm not doing it this way.
Yeah.
This isn't the only way to do it. It's not the right way to do it. There's many ways to be.
Yeah, and it's making me think too of just, compared to the other decans, like Venus and Mars, besides the terms, are the only planets, right, that are like truly peregrine. We have the sun, but like the rest have like triplicity or,
Mm.
rulership. So there's
Hmm.
something here where this is going to be like the most unique Gemini decan. And also with
Yeah,
thinking about sect, like Venus and Mars are both nocturnal planets, and this is a diurnal sign. And so
totally.
there's something about like this is maybe going to be a much more like inward or like what's happening behind the scenes or how you like emotionally grok something is going to be more important than its outer manifestation, because it's like there's kind of this sense of like, let it be what it will be, but like you need to get
Yeah.
emotionally right with it, or else you're going to end up like the Nine of Swords character.
Totally. Or even just like this, the internal contradiction, and then that turns into an external manifestation that it all starts within, right? Like it all starts with the Venus Mars
Yeah,
nocturnal thing, and then we come into Gemini and it has to find some way to express in an outward fashion. But it's only because you've addressed all of that internal complexity that we can even get to the point where you are, Kurt Cobain willing to wear the dress on stage. And it's because he's
exactly.
examined the inner world and been like, I am more than one thing, and I don't have to subscribe to gender norms or forms of expression. I can do it however I want to do it, right? So there is a way that it externalizes, but I think it only externalizes after the internal awareness is there.
Right. And I think at its core, right, Venus and Mars will ask you, like, what do you like and what do you dislike? Right. And I think it's
Totally.
about like being really true to yourself about what that means, even if maybe you like things that feel like they're opposing each other, or you dislike this thing now, but not later. Right. But it's about
Yeah.
being really right with like, what is my experience? And yeah, as you were saying, like, letting it start from there.
Yeah, and loving something that disgusts you is what came to mind as well. Is like there is both attraction and aversion when we find Venus and Mars, right? Which we can see with like even the concept like we were talking about, like hate watching something, right? It's like you are attracted and also you're averse, and you're kind of doing that hate love thing, which are two sides of the spectrum, right? And like you said, if you love something, you can hate it. And if you hate it, you can love it because those polarities are still two sides of the same coin.
Yes. And also, I wanted to quickly amend. I was looking at the wrong Gemini Decan thing. So all the Venus people are wrong. J-Lo
Oh,
and Giselle Bundchen have the
okay.
Venuses. Just wanted to clarify for
I
that.
think
But
that's so funny for Gemini in
I
particular.
know,
It's like,
right? It's
actually, no,
like,
I was wrong, and that's okay.
right. It's well, right. It's like I think, especially with this Decan, you have to, and the Mars and Venus. I mean, Giselle is such a good example of this. Where like,
Totally.
right, just thinking of like, so she got together with Tom Brady. They were so in love, but a lot of the relationship was like her having to martially endure like him being away because of football,
Hmm.
and her kind of having to like hold it down for the kids. And then, right, he reneged on their agreement to retire. I think in like 2019 or something,
Yeah, a
like
couple of
basically
years back, yeah.
he won like his sixth Super Bowl ring or something, and then he's like, no, I just can't. He couldn't be both, right? He
Yeah.
couldn't be both, like the football player and the family man. His identity was so much tied up into football that he lost his family because of it. She had to kind of put the martial foot down of like, this was our agreement. Like, you're not letting me be both like the woman, the family woman, and like the career woman, because she was making more money than him when she was, when they got
Hmm.
together. So she said, no, I have to end it, and now I'm gonna have a baby with my taekwondo instructor.
And the irony is, I just looked at his chart and he has Mars in this decan too. So by
LOL.
denying the two sides, he came into, the martial challenge, and he's a date chart. So Mars is his most difficult planet. And it's like, okay, well, you have the ability to be both, but by denying one, you are inherently denying a core part of you. And that is going to
Exactly.
create controversy, conflict, and challenges in your life. And Mars rules his moon. So it's a very personal story. The moon's in the seventh house. So like it's so tied into his
Oh,
relationships,
that's
right?
funny.
Yeah, I'm glad
Yeah,
that you
it'll
brought
ruin
that one up.
relationships. Yeah. And even
Yeah.
like with J-Lo, like, I mean, the fact that we started Google Images because of a dress that she wore in like 2006.
Really?
And also, yes. So there's,
I did
the
not
Versace
know that.
dress
I
where it's
know the
like,
dress.
yes, okay, right, exactly. And that's why Google Images was created, because everyone wanted to know the dress. And then just the fact that she literally came out with like a like visual album in a documentary, right, going on her second chance with Ben Affleck, and then divorced like a year later. Like,
Yep.
iconic. So
Yeah.
Venus Mars. Like
Well,
you can't
also,
help it.
one of the reasons that's alleged that they were getting the divorce is because she shared his like private, intimate things that he wrote,
Yeah.
like love notes, right? And he was like, this is not okay. Like, this is something that's private and personal, and you want to put it out to the public. And she's
Right.
like, well, it's just, we can be both, right? And I'm thinking, I looked at his chart. He's got Saturn in this decan in the 12th house, right? So
Oh,
like
I wonder why they didn't get along.
yeah, like his duality is expressed behind closed doors, right? It's
Mm-hmm,
not something that's
mm-hmm.
going to be as visible or as public because that Saturn is so tucked away. And so I'm sure that he is like he probably is like the lover, and also the vision that we get of Ben Affleck to the public is like this gruffy kind of like I always think of that image of him like smoking the cigarette where he looks
Oh, exactly.
exhausted, you know?
Exactly.
And then
Yeah.
deep down he's like writing JLo all of these love notes and like has this like amorous affinity for her.
Oh,
And then all of a
totally.
sudden when that's made public, he's like exposed me, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like you can be both and, but sometimes people aren't going to want to do that in the most external way if this planet falls in like a dark house, say the 12th,
Yeah.
the 6th,
Oh,
the
yeah.
8th, right? It's like that duality might be a little bit more personal and a little bit less on, yeah, display for everybody
Yeah.
else to see. And so the revealing of that might feel, yeah, like inherently challenging for them in a way that they're like,
Right.
I'm opting out. I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah, you're going to get the Mars some way. And I think it's wild that we discussed three couples with they both having placements in this deck. And so there's something about
Totally.
like they need someone else who can maybe ride the controversy. Because, even so, it's like, when they first, got together again, it's like Ben knew what he was signing up for. And in some way, he
Totally.
was okay with it. It was just until it became like, oh, there's going to be nothing left for just us. Because, like, I don't know,
Hmm.
that's maybe not how JLo operates. So I think it's
No.
like, yeah, like as you're saying, you might fall in love with one side of them, but the equal and opposite side is going to come out and also has to be loved as well.
Yeah, and that Saturn rules the seventh house too. So it's like so integrated into the way that he approaches relationships, right? But then it's all
Yeah.
of a sudden it's in the 12th house, it's tucked away. It's like, okay, but no, like don't share that with the world. There has to be something that's private,
Yeah.
and I think that that's something for Gemini 2 placements, especially if that does fall in a dark house to consider is does this duality express in a way that is comfortable for you to share with others, or is it a duality that
Right.
exists within? And we talked about kind of the externalization of it through the awareness of the internal. And I think that's a really important part of it. But you have to take into consideration all of the other parts of the chart, which I think is always important to remember with anything in astrology, but especially with the decans, because it is going to color their expression in some way, shape, or form.
Totally.
Like, 12th house placement in this decan is going to show up so differently than like my lot of fortune in the first house in this decan, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's right, it's very visible. We can all see it.
Right.
For Ben, it's not the same case. And so you always want to take into consideration all of the different elements of the chart when you're applying the story to understand it the exact way it's going to manifest.
Right. It's, it might manifest as something more behind the scenes and still something
Totally.
important for you to work with, but maybe other people aren't going to see it. Last thing about Ben is the fact that he married two very different
Jennifer's
women, both named Jennifer.
I was literally thinking that. I was like, the best the both and all of Jennifer and Jennifer.
Exactly. But like so like very different styles of Jennifer.
Yeah. Or even like his like long-term bromance with Matt Damon, and he's like, I will
Incredible.
have the wife and I will have my bestie. And like those will
Exactly.
those will both be the
Exactly.
relationships that he's known for in a way as well, right?
Oh
It's like
yeah.
we don't like half the time that people think of Ben Affleck, they think more of like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon than they do Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner.
Of course, right. And I mean, it makes sense. They became, right, in the very Gemini way, like successful very young, right?
Hmm.
And winning Oscars for like best screenplay. Like it's pretty wild. But you see Good Will Hunting, and you're like,
I
okay, I
get
get
it.
it, which is
I get
also a
it.
movie about duality, right? I
Yeah.
am, this, poor kid from the Southie, but I'm also a genius. And
Yeah,
most
I'm a
right,
savant.
and right, and like Ben Affleck's character basically being like, I want you to leave. I need you to leave, or else you will never be able to actually honor your intelligent potential.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah.
So honor both sides of yourself if you have placements here is the message. And
Mhm.
I think that's a good place to leave it, unless you have anything else you want to add.
I think that's perfect.
All right. Well, then, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of Threads of Fate. Be sure to tune in for the next one on Gemini 3, because that is probably the decan that is the most antithetical to our idea of what Gemini is.
Exactly.
And it's going to be a good one.
She's a
So
fun one.
choose a fun one. Yeah. We will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.